Hi everyone! Today I'm going to show you how to make this beautiful watercolored Christmas poinsettia card using the new Pretty Poinsettias stamp and die set from Honeybee Stamps. So this is the stamp that we're going to be using today. It has lots of pretty poinsettias as well as leaves and berries. And then these are the dies off to the right. And as you can see, they're already pre-clipped, so you don't have to worry about clipping them apart or hurting your finger on one of the ragged edges of a die cut that's not already cut out. So I'm going to start by um, stamping my images onto this watercolor paper. I'm using Arches cold pressed paper, and I'm just going to arrange the images that I'm going to use for our card and then apply some anti-static powder tool really quickly. And then I'm going to take my Versamark ink and stamp my stamps really good. Make sure I get lots of ink on there. And then I'm going to press down really hard. So with watercolor paper, it's really thick and very textured. So you do need to make sure you get a good impression for your embossing powder to hold on to. I'm going to use some gold embossing powder. This is gold embossing powder from Hero Arts. And I'm just going to apply that over top and then make sure that it is nice and that I've got everything covered and I'm gonna go over it a few times with that embossing powder just to make sure that I have some really nice thick lines of embossing powder. Then I'm gonna heat set it with my heat tool. So I heated up the heat tool for about 20 or 30 seconds before using it to make sure it's good and hot by the time I apply it to the paper. And I'm just gonna go around all of the images with the my heat set gun to make sure that the embossing powder is nice and melted. And it probably takes about 30 to 45 seconds to get everything melted. You'll know it's melted when it's pretty and shiny and no longer grainy. Okay, so now we can put our stamped images aside and let them dry and cool a little bit and work on the panel. So I have an A2 size card panel of, again, Arches watercolor cold press paper, and I applied some water first, and then I'm just going to drop in my color, and I'm going to use some greens to match the leaves of the poinsettias that we're going to color in a moment. So I'm just kind of dabbing the water on and the color on in different areas just so I get lots of different colors and different patterns. And I'm also going to use a little bit of this iridescent paint as well, just to give a little bit of shimmer to the background. This is really a background to have fun with. There are no real rules. Just add some clear water to your paper and then just drop in the color and just see where it goes. You can add some splatters like I'm doing here. You can add some of that iridescent paint. Just have fun. And the one rule I would follow is to try to make the background to use some colors that you're going to use in your focal images just to tie the whole design together. That's really the only trick here. So now I'm just going to dry it a little bit with my heat gun. Pardon going in and out of focus while I do that. And then I'm just going to apply a little bit more color. I just wanted a darker background here. I'm going to show you two versions of this card. So the card in the thumbnail has a lighter background, and then the card we're going to be doing here has this darker background. And I'll show you them both side by side at the end so you can decide which version you like better. I'm just going to add some more spatters just to finish off the design here and then put it aside. And there you go. Okay, now we can move on to coloring in our focal images. So I'm going to take some clear water to start. I have a pretty small paintbrush here. I think this is a size 4, and this is the Black Velvet Squirrel Hair brushes. These right now, I'm really enjoying them for watercoloring. They're great brushes. They have a really pointy tip that's really helpful when you're watercoloring. And I'm just going to drop in the color. I'm using a Pyrrole Scarlet here, but any red that you have should work fine. That's just the one that I happen to pull up. And I'm just going to, again, lay down a layer of water, and then I'm just going to drop in that red color and just let it bleed wherever it wants to go. And the great thing about doing this design on embossed lines is that you don't have to worry about the watercolor going all over. It'll pretty much stay within the boundaries of the embossed line. So this is a really great beginner type of watercolor project to do because you don't really have to worry much about water control. You just drop in your clear water, get the paper nice and wet, and then just drop in your color and just let it go wherever it likes to, and it will stop when it reaches those embossed lines. So let's just watch how that works with this leaf here. So I'm laying down my clear water, and then I'm going to take some concentrated color. I'm using Cascade Green here for these leaves, and I'm just going to drop it right in just like that, and it just kind of magically goes to where it wants. It just follows the path of the water, and I'm just going to let that sit and then do that again with these leaves. Just drop in that color, and you can use different variations of the color. The leaves on the top have less pigment. They're more watered down than the leaf on the bottom. Then I'm just going to put those aside and now work on our next element. I'm going to add a little bit of nickel azo yellow here to the little berries in the center, or the stamen, whatever the center of the flower is. And I'm also going to drop some of that nickel azo yellow onto different parts of the leaves, like those light areas, just to add another color into the mix here, just to add some variation and interest to the design. And this is just our first layer. We are going to go and add some more color to it in a bit, but this was just to give a nice, interesting first layer with some reds, some oranges, and some yellows there. For the berries, I'm using alizarin crimson, which is another red shade. It's a little bit cooler of a shade than the pyrrole scarlet, which is very warm. And I'm just going to add that right to the centers of these berries here. Real simple. There's no shading or anything. You just drop in a little bit of color, and then we'll just let that dry. I'm going to use that. Actually, now this is Perylene Maroon, which is the color I'm going to use for our shading on our poinsettia. And I'm just going into the areas that are kind of beneath other leaves. So those are the areas where you might see a little bit of shadow. And then around the little center there, I'm adding a little bit of shading too around those areas. And then I'm just going to let it bleed out. So my paper it's probably about half wet at this point. So the paint has a little bit of room to kind of bleed, but not much. For our pine cone, I'm using sepia, and I'm just going to make sure that I leave some little white spaces there just to give a little bit of interest, since these are really, really small areas to color in, so it's hard to get color variation. So to get the variation on the pine cones, I just left some areas dry so that the paint won't bleed into those areas. So that's a little trick to do if you're working with a really, really small die cut section. Now I'm adding my second layer to the leaves there, just a little bit more of that Cascade Green. And now I've let everything dry, and now I am adding some darker sepia tones to the edges of those little pine cone leaves or needles. And I'm just going to pull it out with a little bit of clear water in a second, just to blend it to the background. And this is a really, really small area to work in. So, you just get a really, really small brush and just really small movements, and clean off your brush pretty often in between pulling out those lines with the clear water, and you should be good to go. All right. So I'm just gonna darken up the shadows in a few areas there and just put that aside for now. And I'm just going to add a tiny bit more of shading to a couple of our leaves with, again, that Cascade Green. And just blending it out with some clear water. So whenever you're blending color out, you want to make sure you have a clean brush with clean water. If there's any color on your brush when you're trying to blend, it's just going to make a matte monotone color. It's not gonna look pretty. It's not gonna have that pretty watercolor transparent variation type look going. So that is the trick. When you're blending, always blend with a brush with clear water. You can use two brushes if you like, so you don't have to keep rinsing your paint off. That's a trick there. I'm going to add a little bit more shading under this leaf, and there I grabbed a second brush with clear water so I don't have to waste all that red paint that I just put down. I'm going to pick up my brush with the paint on it, add some more dark shading, and then pull it out with the water. Every time I reach up there, I'm getting some more water. I wipe the tip off to make sure I get rid of any residual color there, and then I pull out my shade. And that's really the technique. Here's our brush with the concentrated color. Get some water on my other brush, pull it out, clean off my brush in between, just to make sure I'm not pushing the color around, but rather blending it into the color that's already there. And then I'm just gonna keep going in that fashion, being careful to make sure that I leave lots of, like where I already have a real pretty variation of color, like where I have a nice yellow shade, I don't want to color over that. So I'm going to be careful to leave a bunch of those other tones that we were able to blend in earlier. Again, same technique, just pulling out that color with some water. And I think we're just about done, maybe one or two more petals. I'm gonna go close to the center with a little bit of shading, pull it out with some clear water, and then maybe a little bit of shading right in that vein there. And now we can add some gold over top. So I have some gold watercolor paint. It's really, really pretty, and I just dotted it right on top of our little center of the flower. It dried, and now I'm gonna take my die cuts and just place them over the images. Now, the die cut, the Post-it tape doesn't hold very well on watercolor paper because it's really thick and textured. So I'm using 2 pieces of tape for each piece, and I'm being sure to press down really, really firmly, and I'm going to be careful running it through the die cut machine to make sure it stays put. Okay, so we've cut everything out. I'm just going to remove the die cuts here, admire my lovely little watercolored floral images, and then we can set them aside and work on assembling our entire card. Okay, so I'm going to grab that background that we had done earlier. I'm going to take a sentiment from the Pretty Poinsettia stamp set. It says Season's Greetings, and I'm going to stamp that in the lower right-hand corner of our focal panel, making sure I get a good impression. We'll take that gold embossing powder again and use that for our sentiment. We'll heat set it. I just love, I love gold sentiments for Christmas, gold or silver. Usually when I'm doing sentiments, I'll always use white and black. I just find that they pop really, really well and better than other shades. But for Christmas, that's when I get really decorative with the metallic embossing powders. So I'm going to pop up that panel onto some foam tape, and I'm applying that to a fog card base. So I did cut this panel down so that it's 4 inches by 5 1/4, and that is an A2 size card base, meaning it is 5.5 inches by 4 1/4. I'm going to apply some liquid adhesive to our little die cuts that we're going to adhere directly to our watercolor paper. And I'm doing that because, again, adhesive doesn't stick very well to watercolor paper, so you do want to make sure you have a really, really strong adhesive. So that's why I'm using the liquid adhesive instead of tape runner. And here I've popped up our center flower with some foam tape, and that is going to stick really, really well. And then I'm just going to stick in our little images underneath it directly to the card base. Again, there's some liquid adhesive on the backs of them, and I'm only applying the adhesive to the part that's going to stick underneath the flower, just so that the little berries can stick up a little bit from the card and just give a little bit of dimension to the design. And I love how those little berries just fit in perfectly into the little nooks and crannies on our flower. And that is going to complete our card. So here is our pretty poinsettias card, perfect for a Christmas card or a holiday card. And I just love that watercolored look. Here is the card from the thumbnail of this video. So as you see, it has a lighter background and the coloring is a little bit lighter as well. So I'd love to hear from you in the comments which version you prefer and which products from Honeybee Stamp's new holiday cheer release that you love the most and you're most looking forward to getting. All right, thanks so much, everyone. Have a great day, and I will see you again soon in the next video.